The attic smelled like secrets no one was meant to uncover. The first thing that hit me was the air, stale, sharp, carrying a sour bite that clung to my throat. Dust swirled around the single beam of light filtering through the cracked window, and with each breath, I could almost taste the wood, the mothballs, and something faintly metallic, like rust, or maybe old blood. I told myself I was only here for closure. My wife had been gone for 6 months, and I hadn't touched her things. But tonight, when the silence of the house felt too loud and Emily was asleep downstairs, I finally climbed up the creaking wooden ladder into the attic. Each step groaned like a warning. I brushed my hand against the nearest trunk. The wood felt gritty, dust sticking to my skin. My chest tightened, but I pushed forward, dragging out old boxes stacked against the far wall. They were labeled in my wife's neat handwriting. Winter clothes, Christmas, Emily's school projects. Then I saw it. A plain cardboard box shoved behind a stack of photo albums. Its edges were frayed, corners softened by time. But what froze me was the name written across the top in slanted ink. Emily. Not Emily's toys. Not Emily's drawings. Just Emily. My hand shook as I pulled it out. The box scraped against the floorboards with a dry hiss. I crouched down, knees pressing into the rough wood, heart hammering in my ears. Why would my wife hide a box just for Emily? I pressed my palm against the lid. The cardboard felt brittle, fragile, like it could crumble if I wasn't careful. For a moment, I just sat there, staring. My breath fogged slightly in the cold attic air. Open it, a voice in my head whispered. Find out what she didn't tell you. I slid my fingers under the lid. The sound of the tape crackling open was louder than it should have been, ripping through the silence. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Bundles of letters tied with thin red string. A faded photograph of Emily as a toddler, her tiny face smiling at something, or someone, outside the frame. A silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a key. And on top of it all, a faint scent of perfume drifted upward, the same floral one my wife used to wear. It was like she was still here, watching me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered aloud, voice shaking. The words sounded alien in the empty attic, echoing against the rafters. The letters drew my eyes first. The paper edges were yellowing, corners curled with age. The red string cut into the stack, as if holding the secrets inside too tightly. I picked it up. The bundle was lighter than I expected, almost weightless, but in my hands, it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. I could see my wife's handwriting on the top envelope. My stomach twisted. Were these letters meant for Emily? Or from her? I brushed my thumb over the ink, and my mind flashed to every moment my wife had hidden something behind a smile. The late-night phone calls she claimed were work. The moments of silence when I asked about her past. The way she sometimes looked at Emily, not just with love, but with something more complicated. The attic seemed smaller, the air thicker. My pulse raced. I almost tore the string right then, desperate to know. But something stopped me. A sound. Thump. It came from below, faint but unmistakable. My body stiffened. The letters trembled in my hand. The house had been silent for hours. Emily was asleep. Or at least, she should have been. I froze, straining my ears. The silence pressed in. The dust particles hung motionless in the light. Even my own breath felt too loud. Thump. Again. Louder this time. The letters slipped from my grip, fluttering back into the box with a dull whisper. My chest heaved, and my eyes shot toward the attic door. Someone, or something, was moving downstairs. My fingers hovered over the first letter, but a sudden thump from below froze me in place. I expected a mother's keepsakes. What I found was a confession. The second thump downstairs had sent my pulse racing, but when I crept down the ladder, flashlight trembling in my hand, the house was empty. Just the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the quiet tick of the hallway clock. Emily was still asleep, her door cracked open enough for me to see her chest rise and fall. I should have gone to bed, closed the box, pretended I never saw it. Instead, I found myself back in the attic, knees pressed into the cold floorboards, the box waiting like it knew I'd return. The bundle of letters lay on top, bound by the thin red string. My fingers hesitated before tugging it loose. The knot came undone with a soft snap, the string curling against my palm like a vein pulled from flesh. I chose the first letter. The envelope was brittle, yellowed at the edges. My wife's handwriting curled across the front, but it wasn't addressed to Emily. It was addressed to a man. Mark. My stomach turned. I slid the paper free. The attic seemed to hold its breath. My dearest Mark, it began. Her words flowed with a softness I hadn't seen from her in years, no, decades. Words of tenderness, longing, promises of a future she never gave me. I heard her voice in every line, whispering to someone else. My throat burned. I read faster, eyes scanning until they snagged on the words that ripped the floor out from under me. Our daughter must never know. The attic went silent except for the pounding of my heart. I couldn't breathe. My wife, writing to another man. Promises, love, secrets. And now the cruelest twist, our daughter. My hand shook so badly the paper rattled. No, I whispered to myself, but the word felt hollow. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly on the page, mixed with the stale dust of the attic. It made me nauseous, like her ghost was leaning over me, daring me to keep reading. I gripped the page tighter, crumpling the edges. She lied to me, I muttered, my voice breaking. She lied to both of us. The letters blurred as my eyes filled with tears. My breath came shallow, jagged. Mark. Who the hell was Mark? I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered her name like an accusation into the stillness. Why, Sarah? Why? My mind clawed through memories. Nights she claimed she was working late. Phone calls she took in the kitchen, voice hushed. The way she sometimes looked at Emily with that haunted expression, like love mixed with guilt. And now, our daughter must never know. Never know what? I slammed the letter back onto the pile. My hands trembled as I grabbed the next envelope, desperate, frantic. But before I could tear it open, I froze. A floorboard creaked. This time, it wasn't the house settling. Dad? Emily's voice, soft, groggy, from downstairs. My chest locked. I shoved the letters back into the box, my heart battering against my ribs. Yeah, sweetheart? I called, forcing my voice to sound calm, even though it cracked at the edges. There was a pause then. Why are you in the attic? I thought I heard you talking. I swallowed hard, throat raw. Just cleaning up. Go back to bed, okay? Her silence stretched too long. Then, finally, okay. The floor creaked again as she padded back to her room. The door clicked shut. I stayed frozen, sweat chilling my skin, staring at the box. My hands itched to grab another letter, to devour every secret. But Emily's voice echoed in my head. If our daughter must never know, then my wife had been hiding something from both of us. Something bigger than an affair. Something that could shatter Emily's world. If Emily wasn't supposed to know, then what had my wife been hiding from both of us? Uncle Robert's warnings suddenly sounded like threats I had ignored for years. I shifted on the attic floor, the wood groaning beneath me like it carried secrets of its own. My knees pressed into the cold boards, but I barely noticed. My hands shook as I pulled more from the box, a stack of photos, their edges curled and yellowing. Emily as a baby, tiny fingers wrapped around my wife's hand. But then, there he was, Mark, standing too close, his hand grazing her shoulder in one photo, his smile not the smile of a friend but something far more intimate. My stomach tightened into a fist. I thought of Robert then, my wife's brother. His words came back like whispers I hadn't wanted to hear. Some things are better left buried. You don't want to dig too deep, trust me. Back then, I'd laughed it off. He had always been meddling, cryptic, a man who inserted himself into family matters like he had the authority of a patriarch. But now, his vague advice sounded like veiled threats. Had he known? Had he been part of this? I remembered one night in particular. The walls in our old house were paper thin. I'd woken up thirsty, padding toward the kitchen when I heard them, my wife and Robert, arguing in the living room. I froze in the hallway, heart hammering. Her voice was sharp, desperate. You don't understand, Robert. He can't find out. Not ever. His reply was low, controlled, almost chilling. You think you can keep the past buried forever? Secrets rot. They always do. I had stood there, frozen in the dark, clutching a glass of water, pretending I wasn't hearing what I was hearing. When I walked in a few seconds later, they were silent. My wife's face was pale, Robert's jaw was tight. He gave me that smile, forced, lips pressed too thin, eyes not matching. Couldn't sleep either? He had asked. I nodded, said nothing, and walked past them. But now the memory felt poisonous. Back in the attic, I turned another photo over. Mark's handwriting scrawled across the back. Her smile keeps me alive. My vision blurred with rage. I muttered to myself. Robert knew. He knew everything. I heard Robert's voice in my head again. The way he would lean in too close at family dinners, whispering things only I could hear. Be careful, brother. Some questions don't deserve answers. At the time, I thought it was his way of trying to sound wise, like some half-baked philosopher. But paired with these letters, these photos, it was different. His words weren't philosophy. They were warnings, or worse, threats. I could almost see him now, sitting across from me at the table, his posture stiff, fingers drumming against the wood, his eyes darting just a second too long at my wife before landing back on me. He had this habit of tilting his head, as if he was studying me, dissecting me. "Family's complicated," he once said during a holiday dinner, carving meat with deliberate slowness. "We protect our own, even when it hurts." I had brushed it off as drunken wisdom. But maybe he wasn't drunk. Maybe he was telling me straight to my face that he was protecting her, protecting their secret. The attic air was musty, thick, suffocating. I caught the faint trace of my wife's perfume on one of the letters, and it twisted my gut. Rage boiled up, but beneath it was fear. Fear that I had been the fool in a play everyone else already knew the ending to. I whispered, barely audible, "Robert, what did you do?" A memory surged. Robert gripping my shoulder after the funeral, his voice low in my ear while others were still offering condolences. "She carried more than you knew," he said, his hand squeezed tighter. "Don't make the mistake of digging where she wanted silence." I had been too numb with grief to question him, but now those words burned. They weren't kindness, they were instruction, a command. I stared at the photos, the letters, the handwriting that wasn't mine, the smiles that weren't for me. The attic seemed to tilt, the floor threatening to give way under the weight of it all. Robert had been a shadow over my marriage, over my family, and I had been too blind to see it. If Robert had known all along, then what role had he played in making sure the truth never reached me, or my daughter? The paper in my hands rewrote the last 20 years of my life. The attic was silent except for the rasp of my own breath. My fingers brushed against something brittle, folded too many times. The edges cracked like dried leaves as I pulled it free from the bottom of the box. It wasn't a letter, not like the others. It was official. My chest tightened the moment my eyes caught the first line, custody agreement. The words blurred for a second as if my mind refused to process them. But there it was, black ink, dated almost 20 years ago. And then I saw them. Her signature. My wife's elegant cursive that once made me smile when I saw it on birthday cards. And next to it, Robert's. I felt the attic floor tilt beneath me. The text was short, clinical, but each sentence carved into me like a blade. Custody arrangements in the event of disclosure. Financial obligations to be divided accordingly. Emily's true parentage to remain undisclosed under penalty of legal action. My throat went dry, the attic air suddenly tasting of rust and metal. Emily's true parentage. The words glared back at me, cold, unfeeling. I whispered aloud, though my voice cracked. "This can't be real." But the signatures were undeniable. The agreement wasn't forged, it was deliberate, planned. She and Robert had drawn a contract together, a conspiracy written into law. I pressed the paper against my knees, hands trembling. The ink had bled in places where tears, or maybe spilled wine, had touched it years ago. I wanted to believe it wasn't hers, that maybe Robert had forced her. But her handwriting was there, fluid, familiar, hers. I heard his voice in my head again. Robert's smug drawl that always carried too much weight. "You're better off not knowing. Trust me." Back then, it sounded like arrogance. Now I understood it was leverage. He had known. He had been guarding this secret like a weapon. I muttered to myself, my voice harsh in the stillness. "You bastards, both of you." My eyes burned as I tried to reread the clause about Emily. Her upbringing is to remain under the husband's name, with no disclosure of biological origin. The words stabbed me deeper than anything else. My wife hadn't trusted me with the most important truth of all. She had chosen silence over honesty, conspiracy over love. I could almost see her face, calm and distant, the way she used to look at me when she said, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." But behind that calm was a storm she never let me see. I stood up, the floorboards creaking. My knees nearly buckled as a wave of nausea rose in my throat. The attic smelled like dust and mothballs, but under it I swore I could smell her perfume again, faint and mocking. The document shook in my hands. My heart pounded so hard I thought the whole house could hear it. "Why, Sarah?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me? To Emily?" But the paper didn't answer. It just sat there, heavy, damning, undeniable. A memory clawed its way back. Robert standing too close at the funeral, his eyes scanning the crowd, then landing on Emily. The way his jaw tightened, the way his lips curved into a thin line of something between pride and ownership. At the time, I thought it was grief. Now I wasn't sure. I pressed my palms into my eyes, but it didn't block out the truth. It was everywhere, on the paper, in the signatures, in the words that shredded everything I thought I knew. I had lived a lie, for 20 years, and worse. Emily might have too. The paper slipped from my grip and fluttered onto the attic floor. The sound it made was so soft, but it felt like a gunshot in the silence. I wasn't sure if Emily was even my daughter. Grief twisted into suspicion until I could barely breathe. I stumbled down the narrow attic stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. Dust motes swirled in the thin shafts of light slicing through the attic window, catching on the edges of my hair and clothes. The scent of old wood and stale air clung to me, a constant reminder of what I had just uncovered. My chest felt tight, as if invisible hands were constricting my lungs. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The rhythmic tick of the wall clock, the faint groan of plumbing pipes, even the whisper of my own footsteps. I leaned against the hallway wall, trying to catch my breath, but my mind raced faster than my heart. Emily's face appeared in my thoughts, bright and innocent in all those framed photographs on the living room walls. I scrutinized each picture as though they held some hidden message, something I had missed all these years. Her smiles, her eyes, even the tilt of her head. I searched for clues of a truth I never wanted to find. Anger surged through me like molten fire, burning at the edges of my reason. How could she? I whispered hoarsely, voice shaking with rage and disbelief. How could both of them hide this from me, from Emily? I pressed my hands to the sides of my face, nails biting into my skin. My knuckles whitened as grief and fury tangled together. I wanted to scream, to shatter something, anything, in the house. The silence responded like an accomplice, heavy and mocking. I sank into the armchair by the fireplace, staring at the flickering shadows cast by the dying embers. The room smelled faintly of soot and old fabric, but underneath it, I thought I could detect her perfume. Subtle, sweet, impossible. Memories flooded back. Bedtime stories she once read, gentle laughter that now seemed like a cruel mask over years of deception. I muttered to myself, voice barely audible. She left me with nothing but lies. My mind replayed snippets of past conversations with Robert. The hushed tones, the sudden silences whenever I entered the room. The cryptic advice about keeping the past buried. Each memory now felt loaded with sinister intent. He had known. He had orchestrated this in ways I was only now beginning to comprehend. I stood abruptly, pacing the room, fingers raking through my hair. My ears were alive with imagined whispers. The wallpaper seemed to close in on me. The ticking of the clock was a hammer on my skull. I clenched my fists so tightly that the paper-thin skin split at my nails. And then it hit me, the ultimate betrayal. Emily might not be mine. Not really. A cold wave washed over me, leaving my limbs weak. My knees buckled, and I sank back into the chair, trembling. Grief, rage, and fear collided in a storm that left me dizzy. I felt like I was drowning in my own house. Robert, I breathed, my voice a harsh rasp. I need to know. I need the truth. There was no one to answer but the walls, but the resolve in my chest solidified. I couldn't ignore this. I had to confront him, no matter the cost. The thought of facing him made my stomach twist into knots, but the alternative, living another day in this haze of lies, was unbearable. I glanced at Emily's photographs one last time, tracing the curve of her cheek, the spark in her eyes. They were reminders of everything I loved, and everything that had been stolen from me. The room seemed colder now, shadows stretching longer across the floor. The air tasted faintly metallic, sharp against my tongue, as if the house itself knew the storm that was coming. I clenched my fists once more and stood, determination hardening my spine. The house felt alive with secrets, and I was done hiding from them. I had to confront Robert, no matter the cost. Robert's smile was the kind you wear when you're cornered. I stormed into his study, boots thudding against the hardwood floor. The familiar scent of cigar smoke, thick, acrid, and impossible to ignore, hit me like a physical blow. Robert leaned back in his leather chair, eyes narrowing as if he had been expecting this confrontation. His smile was too quick, too polished, the kind that hides a calculating mind. I slammed the papers onto his desk. The thud echoed in the room, a sharp punctuation to my rising fury. You're lying, I spat, voice shaking. All of it. How could you and her, hide this from me? Robert's hands froze over the edges of the desk. For a moment, his forced calm cracked, his jaw twitched, a subtle tremor in his fingers as he tapped them nervously against the wood. He leaned forward slightly, just enough for me to catch the faint glint of sweat at his hairline. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, low, almost casual, but there was no conviction in his words. His eyes, though, betrayed him, small flickers of unease darting under the surface, betraying what he refused to say aloud. I stepped closer, chest tight with rage, trying to make the distance between us irrelevant. "Stop playing games, Robert. I want the truth. I need the truth. Did you know? Did you know about Emily?" Silence filled the den, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the soft hiss of a burning cigar, smoke curling into the air like a sinister specter. His silence was louder than any lie he could speak. My fingers itched to shake him, to force the words out. Finally he laughed, a short, dismissive sound that did little to disguise the tension coiling behind his eyes. His hands, still tapping, faltered for a split second, betraying a nervous rhythm. The smoke swirled around us, thickening the air, but I could feel the heat of confrontation burning sharper than the embers in the ashtray. "You think I'm scared of you?" he said, voice dripping with mockery, yet his lips twitched in a micro-expression I couldn't ignore. The kind that tells a man who has already lost control, but refuses to admit it. I leaned over the desk, eyes locked on his. "Don't lie to me. Don't you dare. You were in on it. You and her. And now I'm standing here, and I will get every answer I deserve." Robert's gaze flickered toward the door, then back at me, as if calculating the odds of escape or confrontation. His body language screamed caution, feet planted firmly, shoulders stiff, but there was a subtle shift, an almost imperceptible step back. That tiny motion, almost invisible, told me more than his words ever could. He knew I was closing in. "You're imagining things," he said finally, almost too quickly. "It wasn't like that. You're blowing everything out of proportion. Emily, she's your daughter. Everything's fine. You just—" His voice faltered, then regained its smooth, practiced cadence. "Need to calm down." I slammed my palm against the desk, rattling the papers. "Enough! I've seen the documents, Robert. I've read her letters. Don't play me for a fool. I know the truth is here, and you can't hide from it any longer." The room fell into tense silence again. The hum of the overhead light, the distant creak of floorboards outside, even the lingering cigar smoke seemed amplified. Every second stretched, a drawn-out rope of anticipation and threat. And then, before I could press him further, the door creaked open. Emily stepped inside, her eyes wide, a mixture of fear and confusion etched across her face. The presence of my daughter shifted the entire atmosphere, adding a new layer of peril and urgency to the confrontation. Robert's gaze flicked to her, a flash of calculation passing over his features, before he returned it to me, still attempting that mask of composure. But I saw it now, the first genuine crack in his armor. Before I could press him further, Emily walked into the room. My daughter's eyes, once filled with trust, now held doubt. Emily's voice cracked as she stepped fully into the room. "What's going on? Why are you yelling?" Her small frame trembled, and the soft light from the hallway caught the fear in her wide eyes. The sound of her words hit me harder than anything Robert could throw at me. I had underestimated just how much she'd hear. Robert's gaze flicked to her, a wicked glimmer flashing across his face. He didn't hide it. He saw an opening, a chance to turn everything in his favor. His lips curved into that practiced, almost predatory smile, the kind that sends a chill straight down your spine. "Oh, Emily," he said smoothly, his tone honeyed, but with a subtle, venomous edge. "Your father, he's imagining things, seeing betrayals where none exist." I felt my stomach twist. Each word he spat was a sharpened blade aimed straight at my heart. My daughter looked at me, confusion and fear intermingling with a nascent anger I couldn't control. Her little brows furrowed, lips quivering. "Lies," I managed to growl, stepping toward her. "He's lying. You have to believe me, Emily." Robert leaned back in his chair, hands drumming against the wood in an almost casual rhythm, yet every tap screamed control and manipulation. "Your father is upset," he said smoothly, voice dipped in mock concern. "It happens sometimes. He's worried about things you don't even need to know. You shouldn't let his imagination frighten you." I clenched my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms. The air seemed to thicken, sticky with the oppressive heat of Robert's lies, the room suddenly too small, too suffocating. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the overhead light, even the rustle of Emily's clothing, seemed amplified, as if the house itself were mocking me. Emily took a hesitant step back. "But I heard things I don't understand," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, breaking through the tension like a shard of glass. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain years of deception, the betrayal hidden behind smiles and whispered late-night conversations, without shattering her completely? Robert seized the silence like a predator, his eyes gleaming. "See?" he said, leaning forward, voice low and deliberate. "Even Emily thinks it's complicated. Sometimes adults have secrets. You don't need to worry about it. You should trust me. He's been so emotional lately, it's unsettling." I wanted to scream the truth, but Robert's poisoned words moved faster than I could respond, infecting the fragile silence between us. Emily's gaze darted back and forth, from me to Robert, doubt creeping into every glance. It wasn't just confusion anymore. It was a subtle fracture in the foundation of trust one had built with her over a lifetime. I forced myself to speak, voice trembling but firm. "Emily, I need you to listen carefully. Everything he's saying is twisted. The letters, the documents, they're real. They explain things he doesn't want you to know." Her eyes widened. "Letters?" she asked, voice barely audible, but laced with urgency. "Yes," I said, moving closer, trying to bridge the chasm Robert had opened. "You need to see them for yourself. Only then will you understand the truth." Robert's face flickered, a micro-expression I caught instantly, fear masked by a swift, practiced calm. He knew I was regaining control, that my words might undo the web of manipulation he had spun so carefully. The tension in the room was electric, a wire stretched taut between deceit and revelation, and every heartbeat felt amplified in my chest. Emily's gaze locked on mine, searching desperately, silently begging for honesty. Her small hand reached out, hesitating toward the desk where the letters lay. I felt the weight of the moment, knowing that the next step would either solidify our bond or leave her further lost in Robert's shadow. Emily demanded to see the letters for herself. The silence between my daughter's sobs was more unbearable than her tears. I handed Emily the letters with hands that refused to steady. My fingers shook so violently I feared they'd tear the fragile paper. The attic light caught the edges of the pages, brittle and yellowed with age, casting thin shadows across her pale face. She took them gingerly, as if handling a bomb, and her eyes widened when she realized the weight of what she was about to read. The first rustle of paper sounded like thunder in the tense room. Emily's breath itched sharply, breaking the quiet, and I felt a twist in my chest. Every syllable unspoken in those letters screamed louder than any words could. Her eyes traced the lines, lingering on my wife's signature, the dates, Robert's inked initials. It was all there, meticulous, damning, undeniable. "Dad, what does this mean?" Her voice was trembling, fragile, cracking like old wood. She didn't look at Robert. She only looked at me, searching for reassurance that I couldn't fully give. I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear and grief flooding my mouth. "Emily, it means that your mother, she lied to us. She hid things, about you, about us, about everything. I never knew." "Not really." My voice broke on the last word, raw and ragged. Robert shifted in the background, his presence oppressive. He leaned slightly forward, fingers tapping the desk in a slow, deliberate rhythm, a thin smile curling on his lips as though he were about to explain away the entire disaster. "Emily," he said, voice smooth, silky, "your father is—" "No!" Emily snapped, cutting him off. Her trembling hands gripped the letters tighter, the paper crinkling under the force. "Don't you dare! I don't want to hear your lies." Her words struck the air like a hammer, a small but determined force pushing against Robert's control. I felt a surge of pride and fear simultaneously. Pride that she was beginning to see, and fear at the sheer volume of emotions crashing down on her so quickly. She was only 14, too young for betrayal of this magnitude, yet strong enough to recognize it. The smell of old ink and paper hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint scent of Robert's cologne, a sour reminder of the tension he always brought with him. The room felt hot, stifling, the walls closing in as Emily's eyes darted between the letters and me. Each tear that slipped down her cheek felt like a drumbeat in my ears, counting down the moments until she fully understood the truth. Her breath grew rapid, shaking with every intake of air, as she traced the letters again and again. "Mom, she betrayed us." Her voice was barely a whisper, the kind that shatters hearts without intending to. "Yes," I said, moving closer, letting her feel my presence, my protection. "I know it hurts, Emily. I know it feels like your world is falling apart. But it's real. You need to see everything for yourself." Robert's expression flickered, something I caught instantly. Fear. Subtle, fleeting, but undeniable. He knew that Emily reading the letters stripped away his power over the narrative, leaving him exposed and vulnerable for the first time. Emily's eyes hardened as she held the letters like shields against him. Then who is my real father? She whispered, voice trembling but carrying the weight of 1,000 questions. Her gaze, sharp now, pierced straight through Robert, who froze, caught off guard. The room became deafeningly quiet. All the manipulation, all the lies, all the carefully constructed facades of control Robert had maintained for years collapsed under her simple, pointed question. Her trust in me, though battered and raw, was returning, while his influence waned with every tear she shed, every breath she took. I reached for her hand, brushing the stray strands of hair from her face, feeling the shiver run through her body. Emily, I promise I'll tell you everything, every secret, every lie. You deserve the truth, no matter how painful it is. For the first time that evening, Emily looked at me not with fear, but with tentative trust. And in that instant I knew we were crossing a threshold, one from which there would be no turning back, no hiding, only revelation and eventual justice. Emily whispered, Then who is my real father? Mark's words felt like a hand reaching from the grave to strangle me. I didn't sleep that night. The shadows in my house seemed to lengthen unnaturally, stretching across walls and floors like living things. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window, made me flinch. 2 nights after Emily had read the letters, a pale envelope appeared at my doorstep. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, until the curling strokes of the familiar script triggered a memory I had tried desperately to bury. Mark. The envelope smelled faintly of almonds, the same scent that had clung to the letters in the attic. I held it in my hands, fingers trembling, as if touching it could somehow ignite the past all over again. The paper was thick, almost fragile, and the ink seemed darker, sharper, almost mocking. Emily appeared behind me, peeking from the doorway. Dad, what is it? Her voice was quiet, wary, sensing the tension coiling around me. I tried to muster a reassuring smile, but it faltered instantly. It's someone from the past, I muttered, struggling to find the words. Someone we thought was gone. My throat felt raw, the words sticking. She stepped closer, curiosity mixed with fear. Who? Dad, tell me. I hesitated. The truth was a blade hovering over both of us, ready to cut deep. His name is Mark, I whispered, the syllable almost tasting like ash in my mouth. He knew things your mother kept hidden. Emily's eyes widened, and she drew a small breath, catching the faint smell of almonds that now lingered between us. Her gaze shifted to the envelope. Is that from him? I nodded slowly, then carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, the ink slightly smudged, like it had been carried with trembling hands. The words sprawled across the page, each one dripping with menace and knowledge. Truth changes everything. Be careful what you dig for. The message was brief, but it carried weight, a dark promise threaded between the lines. My skin prickled. I felt as though unseen eyes were tracking me, following my every movement within my own home. A shiver ran down my spine, and I glanced over my shoulder. Emily was watching me with a mixture of awe and anxiety. I don't understand, she said, her voice catching. Who is he really? Why would Mom hide him? I swallowed, feeling the knot of dread tighten in my chest. He was important. More than I can explain right now. But you need to know, we can't ignore this. Not anymore. Her fingers brushed against the envelope, tentative, as if holding it could summon more danger. The room seemed to shrink around us, the shadows from the corner of the ceiling creeping lower, wrapping the walls in darkness. Robert's face flashed in my mind, smug, manipulative, always 2 steps ahead. If Mark was back in the picture, if he knew what we had discovered, the balance of power would shift. Robert would notice. He always did. Emily's voice broke through my thoughts. Dad, what does he want? Why is he sending this? Her hands clutched mine, small and warm, grounding me against the wave of panic rising inside. I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. I don't know. But the fact that he's reaching out now means he knows we found the letters. He's testing us, watching, waiting. I slid the letter across the table toward her, the edges of the paper trembling under my hand. Emily's eyes scanned the lines, her brows furrowing in disbelief. And what's this? She asked, pointing to the bottom. An address scrawled in the same precise, mocking handwriting, and beneath it, a time. My stomach dropped, a cold anchor dragging me under. This wasn't just a warning, it was a summons. Emily looked up, voice quivering. Dad, we have to go. Don't we? I nodded, my hands tightening around the envelope. Yes. We have to. And we'll find out the truth, no matter the cost. At the bottom of the letter was an address, and a time. The truth was uglier than I had ever imagined. The warehouse smelled like decay and rust, the air thick with the metallic tang of water seeping through cracked walls. Every step I took on the splintered wooden floor echoed through the cavernous space, mingling with the distant drip of water, a rhythm like a ticking clock, marking the time until my life shifted again. My palms were slick, and Emily's hand tightened around mine as we stepped further inside, her small fingers trembling. In the far corner, shadows clung to a solitary figure. Mark. He looked older, thinner, almost fragile, but the fire in his eyes refused to dim. He didn't stand as we approached. He didn't even rise. His voice was low, deliberate in the way a predator might observe prey. You came, he said. There was no warmth, only recognition. I wondered how long it would take. Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why now? He smiled faintly, a twitch at the corner of his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because the truth can't hide forever. You've been digging, haven't you? Emily stayed close, her head pressed lightly against my shoulder. The scent of rust and mildew mixed with the faint trace of almonds that seemed to follow him, a reminder of every secret he had left behind. I need answers, I said. My voice cracked despite my attempt to sound calm. Everything you wrote, everything you left behind. I want it now. Mark nodded slowly, the thin light catching the angles of his gaunt face. I'll tell you, but you need to understand, the story isn't clean. It isn't pretty. Your wife, your Emily's mother, she once planned to leave you for me. She loved me, yes, but Robert, he paused, tapping his thin fingers on the table like a metronome. Robert stepped in. He blackmailed both of us, forcing her to stay, forcing her to keep you chained in ignorance. I felt the air leave my lungs. Betrayal, old and bitter, coiled like a snake inside me. I wanted to strike him, to lash out, but the frailty of his frame only made my anger hollow. He wielded power not through force, but through secrets. And Emily? I asked, voice barely a whisper. What about her? He leaned forward, eyes locking with mine. Her parentage, left deliberately vague. Your wife and I, and Robert, we created a puzzle. Each piece a tool, a weapon. Doubt is stronger than steel, and it binds you all just as tightly as any chain could. Emily shivered beside me, and I felt a pang of guilt. She had been caught in a web spun long before she could understand it. Her small hand reached for mine, and I gripped it tightly, trying to anchor her, to anchor myself, against the vertigo of revelation. Mark leaned back in his chair, the chair creaking beneath him, and for a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The sound of dripping water was louder now, almost mocking, each drop a reminder of time running out. You want to know the rest? He asked finally, a dark glimmer in his eyes. It's here, but it's not mine to give lightly. From beneath the table, he slid a sealed envelope across the scarred wood. The paper was thick, almost too heavy for its size, and the seal was unbroken. I could feel the weight of it, a tangible threat, a promise. Emily leaned forward, her breath catching. What is it? She whispered, wide-eyed, her fingers hovering over the envelope but not touching it. I looked at Mark, and his thin smile made my stomach knot. Open it, he said softly. But be prepared. Some truths, they leave you empty, even if you survive them. The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. The envelope waited between us like a living thing, demanding choice, demanding courage. I felt the pulse of my own fear, of Emily's fear, intertwining, and I realized that opening it would change everything. Mark slid a sealed envelope across the table. Secrets weren't just weapons, they were landmines waiting to explode. The envelope was heavier than I expected. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, the faint scent of aged paper mingling with the warehouse's iron-streaked air. Inside were documents, carefully organized yet screaming betrayal, financial records showing Robert's hidden accounts, letters containing threats, and worst of all, recordings of my wife pleading for silence. The sound of her voice, trembling and desperate, stabbed through me sharper than any knife. Emily peeked at the papers from behind my shoulder, her small face pale. Is this why you and Mom fought? She whispered. Her voice cracked, and my chest tightened. I wanted to shield her from the storm, but the truth couldn't wait any longer. Mark watched quietly, his frail frame slouched but his eyes burning with dark amusement. These are pieces of a puzzle you didn't even know existed, he said softly. Robert has been playing long before you realized it. He doesn't just control your wife, he manipulates everyone around you. Every lie, every threat, all calculated. I swallowed hard. My anger was no longer a flicker, it roared like wildfire. I could almost hear Robert pacing somewhere, plotting, thinking he still had the upper hand. But I had leverage now. The documents weren't just proof, they were power. Mark, I said, my voice low but steady. This is enough. I can use this. I can end this. His thin lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Careful, he said. Robert will not go quietly. He's used to bending people to his will. If you strike too soon, too recklessly, you might find the trap you set for him is already closing on you. The warehouse felt smaller somehow, the dripping water echoing louder, each drop like a warning. Rust flakes drifted down from the roof, dusting the envelope, the table, even my trembling hands. The air was thick with decay, but it tasted of adrenaline, of potential, of war. I spread the papers out on the table, scanning the contents. Each threat, each hidden transaction, each desperate recording painted a picture of Robert's cruelty. The deeper I looked, the clearer his patterns became: control, intimidation, suffocation. And now, finally, I had his blueprint. Emily touched my hand lightly, grounding me. Dad, she said, a tremor in her voice. What are you going to do? I glanced at her, my heart aching at the weight of my next words. I'm going to make him pay for everything. Not just for me, for us. The truth settled heavy in the room. We weren't just fighting for revenge, we were reclaiming our lives. Mark's eyes flicked to the papers. Remember, he whispered, almost like a warning. Every step you take, he will anticipate. He's patient, methodical. The trap you think you're building, it's not one-sided. I nodded, letting the fear mingle with determination. Each breath I drew tasted like iron, like the building itself had absorbed decades of deceit and cruelty. The warehouse's shadows seemed to lengthen around us, stretching like the consequences of every hidden lie. I began to formulate a plan in my mind. Robert would come, confident and arrogant, thinking he still had control. I would use his greed, his overconfidence, against him. Financial exposure, public humiliation, emotional leverage, everything had a purpose. Every document, every recording, every threat would be a tool, a weapon, a key to dismantle the empire he had built on lies. Yet beneath the thrill of plotting revenge was the gnawing awareness Mark had warned me about. Robert wasn't just waiting to be caught, he was ready to strike back. The trap I laid would not only ensnare him but might snap shut on me first. Every careful step forward would be shadowed by the possibility of ruin. Emily's hand tightened around mine. Her presence reminded me why this fight mattered, not for pride, not for vengeance alone, but for the truth, for justice, for reclaiming the fragments of a life that had been stolen piece by piece. The papers rustled under my hands, a thunderous sound in the hollow silence. I drew in a long breath, feeling the weight of what was to come. Every lie exposed was a step toward freedom, but each step carried danger. Secrets weren't just weapons, they were landmines waiting to explode, and I was standing squarely in the middle of them. But the trap I was building for Robert was already being built for me. Betrayal tastes even sharper when it's served at the family table. The house smelled like roasted chicken and melted candle wax, a cozy warmth that belied the storm I had invited in. Every plate, every glass, every flickering candle was carefully placed, designed to lull Robert into a false sense of normalcy. Emily sat beside me, her fingers tightly entwined with mine, her eyes wide and uncertain. I had sent the invitation under the guise of reconciliation, a family gathering, laughter, stories, the illusion of peace. But beneath it all, I held the truth in my hands. The envelope from Mark, the documents, recordings, and financial records, all of it ready to explode. Robert arrived, his usual smirk plastered across his face, eyes darting with calculated charm. I wasn't sure you'd actually invite me, he said, voice light but eyes sharp, searching. I hope this isn't going to be awkward. Not at all, I replied, voice calm, masking the pounding of my heart. We're all here to share a meal, to reconnect. The table was set. Emily passed bread, laughing nervously at a joke my mother had told. I watched Robert's eyes, searching for the slightest crack. He was good, too good, at hiding tension beneath a polite facade. But I had something he couldn't anticipate. Proof. Let's get started, I said, clearing my throat. There's something I need to show everyone. I spread the documents on the table, the rustle of paper cutting through the chatter like a knife. Robert's smirk faltered. A micro-expression, quick, almost imperceptible, of fear. His fingers twitched on the edge of the table, and for a moment, his confident posture wavered. "What's this?" he asked, voice tight, controlled. "Evidence," I said, meeting his gaze. "Evidence of threats, lies, and manipulations you've hidden from all of us, including the recordings of my wife, begging you for silence." Emily gasped, her small hands covering her mouth. She glanced at me, eyes wide with a mix of horror and relief. "All this time," she whispered. Robert's color shifted slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowing something bitter. His foot tapped a rapid, uneven rhythm under the table, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. I began reading aloud, selectively exposing transactions, threats, and letters. The room grew tense. The smell of chicken and candle wax became faint compared to the metallic taste of anger and fear. Robert's jaw tightened, the thin veneer of control cracking further with every revelation. "You're lying," he finally spat, voice rising, trembling with fury. This doesn't prove anything." "Oh, it proves plenty," I shout back, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "And it's only the beginning. Every secret you've hidden, every lie you've spun, it's all here." Voices rose around the table. Emily's mother gasped. My parents exchanged horrified glances. Robert's hands shook as he slammed a fist onto the table, rattling plates and glasses. The crash echoed, punctuating his unraveling control. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone?" he yelled, veins bulging at his temples. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Emily shrank back, eyes wide, frozen in disbelief at the man she had once trusted. "Dad, is this true?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes," I said softly, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "It's true. And now you know why I couldn't stay silent any longer." Robert's smirk, the mask he had worn so flawlessly, was gone. What remained was raw, naked anger, a dangerous intensity that made my stomach tighten. I realized then that control had shifted. He no longer held it. He was flailing, reacting, exposed. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with tension. Candle flames flickered, shadows stretching across Robert's contorted face. Every accusation, every word, every exposed secret was a hammer chipping away at his carefully constructed image. I breathed slowly, letting the weight of the moment sink in. For the first time, I felt that raw, exhilarating shift. The hunter had become the hunted. Yet in the pit of my stomach, I knew this was far from over. Robert stood, veins bulging, and shouted, "You think this is over? You don't know anything yet." Sometimes the strongest chains break with the loudest snaps. The moment Robert realized the documents had stripped him bare, his entire demeanor changed. The carefully curated mask of charm, the arrogant smirk, all vanished like smoke. He stood, towering, or at least trying to, over the table, hands clenched so tightly the knuckles were white, fingernails biting into his palms. "You think you know everything," he spat, voice low at first, then rising with venom. "Do you have any idea what I've done for this family? For your miserable little lives?" I could feel the vibration of his words in my chest. Emily clung to me, her small body trembling, tears wetting my shirt. Her fear, raw and unfiltered, made the anger inside me sharper, hotter, more focused. I wanted to calm her, but I also wanted to watch the man who had terrorized us for so long crumble. Robert's pacing grew erratic. The metallic scrape of his shoes on the wooden floor echoed through the room like the drumbeat of impending disaster. He shoved chairs aside, knocking one into the wall, the loud crash making my stomach twist. "I gave you everything. Money, opportunities. Don't act like you weren't complicit in enjoying them." I noticed the subtle tremor in his hands, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the flicker in his eyes when he realized he couldn't intimidate anyone anymore. Every sentence he barked revealed more than he intended. Siphoned funds, threats made against Emily, years of manipulative scheming designed to keep us under his thumb. "Stop it!" my mother shouted, voice breaking, but Robert ignored her. He was a hurricane, verbal and physical, tearing through the room. Plates rattled, glasses tipped dangerously close to the edge of the table. "I warned you!" he roared. "I warned you not to dig!" Emily sobbed quietly into my chest. Her small hands gripped my shirt as if holding me upright while the storm passed. I whispered reassurances, though my own heart was hammering like a drum in a war zone. "It's over," I murmured, though I knew this was only the beginning of our new reality. Robert's arrogance had evaporated, replaced by desperation. The mask he had worn so flawlessly was now in shards around his feet. "You think this pathetic display, can hurt me?" he screamed, spit flying, veins bulging, eyes darting wildly. I am in control! The room smelled of sweat, fear, and burnt candle wax. The combination was dizzying, almost suffocating, as Robert flailed, shouting names, recounting threats, exposing the skeletons in his closet with every word. Every revelation, every confession, weakened him further. I saw his gaze flicker toward Emily, as if realizing the depth of his failures. She was the one he had tried to manipulate, the one he had sought to control, and now she looked at him with horror and disbelief. His power over her, over us all, had evaporated in minutes. Finally he stopped, chest heaving, trembling, eyes darting around as though searching for an escape. His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. You don't understand. You'll regret this. But there was no control left in his tone, no fear in our eyes. He had become a man exposed, a fraud laid bare. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of truths finally uncovered. Emily clung tighter, burying her face in my chest, and I held her, letting her sobs quiet my own racing thoughts. We had survived the storm, but the aftermath lingered like a thick fog, and I knew our lives had irrevocably changed. Robert left that night not as the man in control, but as a desperate, exposed shell of himself. The door slammed behind him, a final punctuation mark on years of manipulation and deceit. The room remained quiet, the remnants of chaos scattered across the floor, upturned chairs, knocked plates, and the lingering metallic scent of fear. A week later, a cake arrived at my doorstep, with a letter tucked beneath it. Sometimes the deadliest threats don't come with shouts, they come in silence. The cake sat there on the table, untouched. Its delicate icing seemed almost mocking in the dim kitchen light, and the faint smell of almonds lingered, sharp and unsettling, like a phantom of all the lies Robert had spun over the years. Beside it, an envelope rested, the paper crinkled but unmistakable, his handwriting, precise and deliberate. My hands trembled as I slid it open, Emily standing behind me, silent, watching every flicker of my expression. You may have won this battle, old man, but the war isn't over, the letter began. Even the opening words carried that familiar coldness, the personal sting only he could deliver. My stomach tightened, a mix of rage and a thread of fear coiling in my chest. He recalled moments no one else could. Private conversations, family secrets, my mother's whispered doubts that I had tried to suppress, my own missteps disguised as carelessness. Remember the attic? One line read. The box you thought forgotten? I watched you sift through its contents like a child peering into a forbidden treasure chest. Do you feel clever yet, or merely exposed? I could feel Emily shift behind me, her hand lightly brushing my arm, seeking reassurance. I inhaled deeply, tasting the cold metallic tang of iron in the air, an almost premonitory flavor, as if the room itself were aware of the storm Robert had unleashed from afar. I let my jaw tighten, refusing to let the fear dominate. His words were cruelly specific, almost theatrical in their malevolence. He described moments from my past, citing names, dates, and incidents I hadn't thought anyone remembered. You think Emily's safety was ever guaranteed? I had the power to shape her reality without her even knowing it, he wrote, a sinister grin invisible but palpable through his words. Do you understand how fragile your little world is? I felt a surge inside me, not fear, not sorrow, but a cold, determined fire. Robert had thrived on control, on making everyone believe he was untouchable. But here he was, speaking from behind the veil of distance, revealing his obsession with power over my life. His laughter, though absent in person, echoed in every sentence, the cadence unmistakable. I turned to Emily, her eyes wide but steady, reflecting trust and resilience. It's him, I murmured. All of this, it's him. But he underestimates us now. The letter continued, recounting private failures and moments of humiliation I had thought long buried. Did you think your reconciliation party would bring closure? That was naive. You've only opened a door I've been keeping ajar for decades. The war is long, and patience is my weapon. I could almost see him pacing in some darkened room, the faint twitch of his jaw, the forced smile never quite reaching his eyes. The micro-expressions were there even in the letter, the subtlety of someone relishing control, someone whose power came not from muscle, but from psychological dominance and secret knowledge. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but alongside it came clarity. All those years of being his pawn, of living under the shadow of his manipulation, were over. I had seen his weaknesses. I had seen the cracks in his armor. And now, armed with truth, evidence, and the resolve forged through pain and fear, I was ready. Emily, I said, voice low but steady. He thinks he can haunt us with words, but words can't control us anymore. She nodded, placing her hand over mine, a quiet solidarity that warmed the cold dread in the room. The cake, untouched, seemed almost to taunt us with its silent presence. Its sweetness was a cruel contrast to the bitterness of the letter, the duality of threat and normalcy, like a bomb disguised in celebration. I knew better than to underestimate it, or him. Finally, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Every nerve in my body was alert, every muscle tense, not with fear, but with anticipation. The war Robert promised had begun, and I would not be caught unprepared. The clock on the wall ticked past 11, each second amplifying the silence in the house, until finally, the hands aligned to strike midnight. In that instant, the air seemed to thicken. I swear I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, but unmistakably his laughter, echoing through the quiet house, curling around the walls like smoke. A reminder that while we had claimed victory in the visible battle, the war was only beginning. I swallowed the lump in my throat, letting the adrenaline settle into resolve. The fire inside me, dormant for so long, had been reignited. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer bound by his manipulation. Robert's threats, his cruelty, his obsession. They had awakened something far stronger in me: vigilance, determination, and the unyielding drive to ensure he could never touch us again. As Emily leaned against my shoulder, I stared at the cake and the letter once more. The smell of almonds, faint but persistent, seemed to mark the beginning of a new chapter, not of fear, but of calculated resistance. Silence reigned, but I knew it was deceptive, and in that deceptive silence, I was ready. And as the clock struck midnight, I swore I heard Robert's laughter echoing in the dark. Healing doesn't erase scars, it teaches you to live with them. The smell of almonds never really left me. Even weeks later, it lingered in the corners of my mind, a ghostly reminder of Robert's cruelty, his meticulousness, and the twisted care he took in crafting every threat. It was subtle, almost sweet, but poisoned. Every time I caught a whiff, I remembered the letter, the cake, the silent laughter I had sworn I heard echoing through the house at midnight. Emily and I sat in the living room one evening, the sun sinking low and casting long, warm streaks across the hardwood floor. I studied her face, not with doubt, not with suspicion, but with a protective intensity that bordered on feral. She noticed it, flinching slightly, and I forced a smile. "I'm here," I whispered, though she didn't need the reassurance. She knew. She had always known. I pulled my notebook from the table, the pages already brimming with observations, details, timelines, and potential contingencies. Every movement Robert had made, every slip of arrogance, every subtle threat, it was all being documented. Each entry felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I wrote with precision, sometimes pausing to recall the tiniest expressions Robert had made, the twitch of his hand, the nervous lift of his eyebrow when he thought no one was watching. "He's not gone," I muttered, not to Emily, but to the shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls of the house. The silence answered back, a stillness that felt less like emptiness and more like anticipation, as if the house itself knew the war wasn't over. Emily came closer, her hand brushing mine over the notebook. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling, but steady. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw strength reflected in the small curve of her lips, in the way her eyes had hardened yet remained gentle. "I'm okay," I said, my voice low and certain. "More than okay. I've learned something important." "What's that?" "That scars, they don't vanish," I said, closing the notebook with a deliberate snap. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and clear, like a bell tolling the end of innocence. "But they teach you something better, how to survive them, how to use them." The memories of my late wife's betrayal still lingered, ghosting through the back of my mind like bitter smoke. There was pain, yes, but no longer control. Her choices, Robert's manipulations, my fear, they no longer dictated my actions. I had reclaimed that power. The air in the house no longer felt like suffocating solitude. It hummed with the quiet readiness of someone who had faced darkness and emerged with purpose. I traced the edges of the notebook, feeling the texture of its worn leather, and imagined Robert reading it, realizing that every move, every thought, every contingency he had tried to obscure was now mapped, anticipated, and ready to be turned against him. My fingers lingered on a page filled with calculations and observations, a testament to the patience revenge demanded, and the discipline it required. "Do you think he'll come back?" Emily asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and fear. I exhaled slowly, tasting the cool air, the faint metallic tang of old memories and iron resolve. He will, I admitted. But that doesn't scare me anymore, because when he does, we'll be ready. Not just to survive, but to strike back. The room was quiet, but heavy with the tension of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Shadows shifted as the sun dipped lower, elongating across the walls, mirroring the long reach of the past into our present. Every scar, every reminder of betrayal, was now a tool. Every memory of deceit, every wound inflicted, became a lesson in strategy, vigilance, and survival. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling Emily's presence beside me. Protection, trust, and a quiet determination radiated between us, stronger than any fear Robert could manufacture. The scars didn't disappear, they had teeth, and I had learned to tame them. And somewhere out there, Robert was planning his next move. I could almost sense the careful calculations in his mind, the meticulous planning, the lurking menace. But so was I. Every note, every detail, every lesson learned from our encounters had prepared me for this. He might think he controls the narrative, that he dictates the game, but I had reclaimed the board. I opened my eyes, the fading sunlight catching the corners of the room. Shadows of the past still lingered, yes, but they no longer ruled us. The war wasn't over. It had simply entered a new phase, and this time, I was ready. Somewhere out there, Robert was planning his next move, and so was I.